on this. Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's Digital Library Platforms panel discussion. My name is Hannah Wyatt Davis, and I'm your moderator for the day. I am a member of SSDN Training Working Group, as well as the Preservation Librarian at Florida State University. Today, you'll learn tips, tricks, and works around for various features for each platform and how each institution is using their platform through different kinds of digital library content. At the end of the presentations, we'll have plenty of time for you to ask questions. Due to the amount of attendees we have today, I ask that you keep your microphone on mute and ask your questions in the chat box. We have some excellent guests with us today that I'd like to introduce you all. First off, we have Kaleena Rivera. She is the Digital Initiatives Librarian at Florida Gulf Coast University's Wilson G. Bradshaw Library. She has worked with SSDN since 2018 and is the SSDN Metadata Working Group Vice Chair as of April 2020. Elliot Williams is the Digital Initiatives Metadata Librarian at the University of Miami. He is in charge of coordinating the metadata creation for the library's digital collections and assists with managing the library's CONTENTdm repository. Laura Capell is the head of digital production and electronic records archivist at the University of Miami Libraries. She manages digital projects for the library's distinctive collections and coordinates electronic records archiving initiatives. She is actively involved in administering the library's digital collections via CONTENTdm. Jill Krefft is the Institutional Repository Coordinator at Florida International University. In this role, she works to provide open access to research, scholarship, creative works, and university archives from FIU. Jill supports efforts to provide access to digitized and born digital collections produced at FIU while maintaining high standards for metadata, collection curation, and preservation. These efforts ensure continued access to unique collections supporting education and community engagement in South Florida. And last but not least, we have Katrina Harkness. She is the Education Officer for the State Archives of Florida in Tallahassee. She holds a BA in Psychology from Florida State University and an MAT in Elementary Education from Elms College in Massachusetts. As the State Archives lead educator, Katrina develops innovative educational content for the Florida Memory website, featuring historic documents, photos, and other primary sources from the archives collection. And without further ado, I'm going to pass this off to Kaleena, and she's going to talk about her experiences with Islandora.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. All right. There we go. All right, so today I'm here to talk about FL Islandora, which is Florida's instance of Islandora out of FALSC. So for those that don't know, Islandora itself, it's an open source digital library system that builds on other open source systems to provide a repository, ingest mechanisms, and display interface and other features for managing and exposing digital content. So it runs on like Drupal, Fedora, Solar, and so FL Islandora is the instance provided by FALSC and used by a variety of state university and Florida college systems. So for our instance here at FGCU, what you're staring at here is the homepage, and it's pretty standardized for those institutions within the consortium as far as having blocks, fonts, etc. And as you can see, we have the repository parsed out into the digital library on one side, which consists of our special collections, and then our IR. and the research repository. And once you're inside, this is pretty much the layout. You've got this nice block system. I actually think is fairly appealing. It's just a small assortment of our collections, and it's nice as Islandora does handle a variety of different kinds of formats. So we have, for example, so for our photography collections, for example, it are still images, and then it handles PDFs, moving images as well. So talking about videos, audio content, etc. And I've been working on this system since I started for as a staff member back in 2015. And it's pretty user-friendly in a lot of ways. While there is there's a decent amount of clicking, but it is fairly user-friendly, which is incredibly helpful when you're trying to teach staff or interns how to do functions such as general loading and editing assets. So, and having help like that, it's helpful when you have to do things. So, for example, here's what our assets look like when you go in them. There's a preview, which does, there's a tab to have the actual asset be larger. And you have your metadata, as you can see here, a cursory glance to kind of show you there's some redundant metadata and some that's not entirely correct. So like most repositories, you do have to go in and clean stuff up every now and again. I think I did this out of order. So the back view looks something like this when you want to go in and kind of make some changes. So you have a variety of functions that are pretty much available to you at a click. So you have your data streams and whatnot here. And once you create an asset, what's nice about Islandora is that it creates derivatives automatically. So while Islandora does use mods, but it will go ahead and generate a Dublin core record, as well as thumbnails, etc. So once you go in there and you go into the mods, you make your changes, you can come out the other side, having something that's far tidier. This has been really helpful. It's been great doing this. I'm working on this system. It does have limitations, however, because of various issues such as lack of development, unfortunately. So like, yeah, and one of the main drawbacks really is the inability to batch edit, which means that any collection-wide edits that needs to be done requires manually editing each individual asset, which can be a rather slow process, to be certain, depending on the size. However, I will say that it has been really, really deeply gratifying to work with SSDN, much of that due to the fact that this is fairly lonely work. I think for those of us who are working on repositories especially, there's usually only one, if not just a handful of folks to kind of solicit ideas and bounce opinions off of. I'm the only one who works on it on a daily basis. So what's been great about working with SSDN is that they have the capability of drawing out the data and being able to point out explicitly via very helpful reports they're kind enough to assemble, that you can then go and locate anything that requires sort of editing and updating. This is really valuable, especially when it comes to older collections, which you probably haven't looked at in quite some time. I know that's a situation over here, and it may have outdated metadata or incorrect data. That's a lot of our previous issues, was folks that predated us. How am I looking on time right now?
You're good.
Okay, great.
You've got maybe 5 more minutes.
Okay, great. Yeah, apologies, I'm a little short on slides right now. Let me see, and yeah. Okay, I do see a question in the chat.
Oh, there you go. You saw it.
Offer drop-down subject headings. That's a great question, actually. So the answer is no. The subject headings, those are free. In fact, the majority of the mods that are placed in the form are free value, with the exception of a few of them. So for subject headings, that's kind of, I would say, kind of dealer's choice. We over here, we use primarily Library of Congress subject headings, unless there are collections that there's really a better option as far as subject headings, but generally, yeah, so Library of Congress, and yeah, they are free value systems.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Kaleena, for presenting about Islandora. Up next, we have Laura and Elliot, and they're going to be discussing CONTENTdm at UM.
Hi, everyone. This is Laura. Let me know if you have trouble hearing me. So Elliot and I are going to answer a series of questions about CONTENTdm. And so if I can get the slides to move forward, okay, oops, sorry. Okay, so the first question we're going to answer, how did your institution end up with your platform? I'm going to start with a brief overview of our digital collections. We have around 130 digital collections, totaling over 500,000 pages, and the content comes from our Cuban Heritage Collection, Special Collections, and University Archives, as well as our Marine Sciences, Music, and Architecture libraries. Our digital collections include a wide range of formats, including documents, photos, books, periodicals, maps, posters, architectural drawings, scrapbooks, slides, audio, video, oral histories. I'm not exactly sure when UM started using CONTENTdm, but I know it's been at least since the mid-2000s. From the start, we've been using a locally hosted instance of CONTENTdm, but several years ago, OCLC stopped hosting local instances, and they're only supporting the OCLC hosted version. So we had to search for a new digital collection system. We evaluated several different options, including Islandora and a European system called Tind, but we ended up going with the OCLC hosted CONTENTdm. We're in the process of doing the migration right now, and our new digital collection site should be up and running by the end of the summer. The OCLC hosted version of CONTENTdm is definitely an improvement over the older version that we've been running. They've added some new functionality and they've redesigned the user interface. And I have to say the migration process was smoother than expected. I think largely because we were migrating from one instance of CONTENTdm to another. We did a lot of cleanup to prepare for the migration, but once we sent our data to OCLC, they had our new site up and running in a matter of days. Now we've been focusing on updating and customizing the website. We had to start from scratch, making new landing pages for each of our digital collections. But it's been a good time to take a close look at things and make some much needed updates. The slide has the link to our current CONTENTdm site as well as our new site, which is still a work in progress, in case you want to check those out.
Hi everyone, this is Elliot. So the next question we were going to talk about is sort of our general experience using CONTENTdm. And one of the things that I think makes CONTENTdm really unique is that it has multiple staff user interfaces for working with collections. So there's a desktop application that's called the project client, which we use for uploading items and creating and editing metadata for our collections. And the project client is really useful because it makes it easy for multiple staff people within the library to work on a single project. It also has an interface that I think is pretty well designed for creating and editing metadata. As a metadata person, that's one of the things I really value about CONTENTdm. One of the downsides of the project client, though, is that it only works on Windows computers. So that's a challenge for some of our colleagues who use Macs primarily. CONTENTdm also has a web-based administration interface, which is where you can configure collections, edit users, and do a lot of the configuration for the public website. And that interface is really useful as well because it makes it fairly easy to do a lot of the management of the system within a simple GUI interface. And we have some screenshots of those two interfaces that we'll show here just in a second. Within CONTENTdm, all digital objects are part of a collection, and every item is part of one and only one collection, which I know is different from some other systems. Like I think Islandora items can be in multiple collections, but in CONTENTdm, they're only in one collection, and that's how they're accessed. Most of the configurations of the system can be done at that collection level. So that includes things like defining metadata fields, turning on the ability to print and download images, defining facets for the user interface, things like that. And at we mostly base our digital collections on the structure of the archival collections that the materials have been digitized from. So for the most part, each archival collection is its own collection within CONTENTdm. I know other institutions do this differently, but that's historically how we've structured our digital collections, and it seems to work well with the way that CONTENTdm defines collections. As with, I think, most systems, CONTENTdm can handle a wide variety of material types, and most of the materials that we've wanted to store within it, we can. So you can upload image files, and that can be a variety of image formats, PDFs, audio files, video files. I forgot to put it on this slide, but you can also upload just URLs, which is kind of a nice feature. And when you're uploading files into the system, they can be added as individual sort of single page objects or as multi-page, what CONTENTdm calls compound objects. For example, 10 images that make up one book. We're actually currently working on a project where we're uploading all of the images from one archival folder as a single compound object. So some of those compound objects can be quite large. I think we've had one that's like up to 500 images, and that the system can handle that okay. And then within a compound object, there's metadata that applies to the object as a whole, and then metadata can also be attached to each individual file within it, which is nice. Laura, I'll pass it off to you.
Okay. And so another feature of CONTENTdm that we use is that you can embed players for viewing audio and video that's hosted in a separate system. And we do this for our audio and video, which is hosted in Kaltura. And so we just embed the Kaltura player into CONTENTdm. And if you have 3D objects, I believe you can also embed a viewer for those, like the Sketchfab viewer, which is something I'm hoping we can test out soon. And one thing I really like about CONTENTdm is that you can generate access derivatives upon ingest, either JPEGs or JPEG 2000s. And this saves a lot of time for our digital lab because we only have to focus on creating the master files, and then CONTENTdm will create the JPEG 2000s for us when we ingest items. And CONTENTdm can also generate OCR upon ingest, but they run an older OCR engine, and we've found that we get higher quality results by creating the OCR outside of CONTENTdm using Abby FineReader, and then loading the OCR files during ingest. And that was one of our big cleanup projects during the migration, to replace a lot of our older CONTENTdm generated OCR with the newer, better OCR from Abby. And a nice feature that you would have is that you can control access to items or collections by limiting access to certain IP addresses or users. And we have several collections where access is limited by the IP range just to the library because of copyright concerns. And so any user that comes in the library can access those collections, but users outside of the building can't. And another good feature about CONTENTdm is that it now supports IIIF. And this is something that we'll be implementing this summer to enhance image operability across systems. And we're really excited about trying that out. And so now I'm going to turn it back over to, before I turn it over to Elliot, here's a screenshot of the project client with the metadata editing capabilities. And you can see all of the metadata fields going across there. And you can click into individual records to see a full list of the metadata for that record and edit it. Or you can also edit it in this grid view here. And you can sort, and it's really nice to use.
And can I interject something real quick there, Laura?
Oh, sure.
Just to Georgian's question about subject heading. So within the project client, when you open up an individual item, you can, if fields are defined as using a controlled vocabulary, it will show you all of the values that have been defined for that vocabulary. So it makes it really easy to, add subject headings that you've used previously. You do have to sort of add those into the system. It doesn't automatically pull from like LCSH or the Getty vocabularies or anything, but once you've added them, it's really easy to add them to another record, which is nice and helps with that sort of authority control.
And here's a screenshot from the web admin interface, and this is a shot of like the metadata fields and how you can go in and add metadata fields for a particular collection and configure them, and you can edit this, and you have this capability for each of the digital collections. And now for Elliot.
So as far as sharing our metadata through SSDN, sharing to DPLA, so as we kind of just mentioned, and as Laura just showed, metadata fields in CONTENTdm can be defined per collection, and you can define them to be pretty much whatever you want. Unlike other systems, CONTENTdm doesn't strictly adhere to any existing metadata standards, such as mods or Dublin Core. So that means that metadata is very flexible within CONTENTdm, which in my opinion is both a good and a bad thing. It means you can customize the metadata to meet the needs of your specific collections, which is really great and is something that we've kind of gotten used to doing. But it also means that there's a lot of variability across the repository. And that can be particularly problematic for sharing with DPLA because it means that the mapping of our local metadata to DPLA's metadata profile can be more complicated. So it took some more work when we were first sharing with DPLA. There was more work to kind of make sure all of our collections were configured consistently to share with DPLA, which I don't think is the case with some other systems that define a more rigorous or rigid metadata schema. So as for sharing metadata, CONTENTdm allows you to map individual fields to qualified Dublin Core fields. So individual fields can be mapped to any qualified Dublin Core element or to none. So if you don't map a field to Dublin Core, then it just isn't shared. And because Dublin Core is relatively limited in what elements it provides, it means that that mapping process often involves losing some of the specificity of the local metadata schema when you're sharing. So I think it's really important to take that into account when you're thinking about how to create metadata in CONTENTdm. And that's something that we've been working more on since we started sharing our data with DPLA. CONTENTdm actually makes it really easy to share metadata via OAI PMH, which is what we use for sharing with SSDN. OAI PMH is built in and can be turned on collection by collection, so it's really easy to pick and choose what collections you want to share. But one thing about its OAI PMH capacity though, is that it doesn't include a link to the thumbnail image, which is pretty important for sharing with DPLA. But we worked with SSDN to find a way to generate thumbnail URLs based on the item URL. So SSDN now has a pretty established way to do that for all CONTENTdm repositories.
Okay, and the final question we're going to go over today is, what do you love and hate about your platform? And I'll just start by saying, like all systems, CONTENTdm has its quirks, but we've used it for so long that we've grown accustomed to them. Plus, after evaluating different systems, we've really just come to determine that there is no perfect digital collections platform. So on the plus side, the staff interfaces and the tools are really easy to use. And it's also easy to manage multiple projects at once. And our staff who work on metadata really like working with the project client, and they were really worried about losing that functionality when we were looking at other systems. CONTENTdm is used by a wide range of institutions. So there's a large user community of academic libraries, public libraries, archives, both large and small. And it works pretty well out of the box, and it's pretty simple to get it up and running. And there's good documentation for getting started. The website may not look exactly how you want it to out of the box, but you can make quite a few changes to the look and feel of the site by using the website configuration tool. And you don't need a lot of programming knowledge to do that. Turn it over to Elliot now.
Also, I think one of the things that we liked about CONTENTdm when we were looking at systems is that because it's hosted, it doesn't require a development team to maintain, which was important to us. We didn't have the staff to set up, sort of our own Fedora instance or anything like that. We have customized the web interface a bit, as Laura was just saying, but that's about it. Although there is an API if you want to do more advanced programming, and some CONTENTdm sites do really cool stuff with that. Our old site had a lot of customizations, but for the new one that we're migrating to now, we've decided to keep it as simple as we can for maintenance purposes. OCLC has recently updated the front end, but the back end hasn't been updated in many years. The project client is pretty much the same as it was, I think, when the system debuted 15 years ago. OCLC has said they're planning to update the project client in the next few years, but we don't really know what that's going to look like or what the timeline is. The front end for users isn't the most elegant user interface. It's fairly user-friendly, but it could be better. But as Laura said, the new OCLC hosted interface is much better than the old interface we were migrating from. Similar to what Kaleena was saying for Islandora, bulk metadata editing is very difficult in CONTENTdm. I think that's a thing that a lot of metadata folks want to be able to do, and it's never as easy as we dream it is. Within CONTENTdm, it's pretty much impossible to edit metadata across multiple collections at once. You have to do it collection by collection. And there also isn't an easy way to overlay existing metadata, for example, by editing the metadata in Excel or OpenRefine and then loading it back in. There is a metadata editing API called the CONTENTdm catcher, but it requires some custom scripting to work with. And so it's a little difficult. Although again, this is something that OCLC has said they're developing new tools for. And then lastly, CONTENTdm is not really linked data capable at all in its current form, which is something we're a little disappointed by. You can add URIs in the metadata, but CONTENTdm really just treats them as normal links. So that's something we're hoping is going to improve in the future. And again, OCLC has said they're experimenting with a linked data version of CONTENTdm. So I'm excited to see where that goes. And I believe that was all that Laura and I had, but we'll look forward to answering questions at the end.
Awesome, thank you so much, Laura and Elliot. Up next, we have Jill from FIU, and she's gonna talk about digital commons.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm excited to share our experiences with digital commons at FIU. Let me just make sure I can click forward. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So what is Digital Commons? Digital Commons is our full text online open access repository and publishing platform. This is a hosted repository platform. It's hosted by a company called Berkeley Electronic Press, or B-Press. We have been running Digital Commons at FIU since 2009, and I have been the IR coordinator since 2011. So I like to think we have a sort of a long history working with Digital Commons. And at our institution, our repository, of course, it is a traditional institutional repository in that it collects scholarships such as preprints and postprints and all of that stuff. But we also have lots of creative works and sort of the history and archival materials from the FIU community. So we have a really broad scope for our collections. This is a screenshot of our repository homepage, and I wanted to share this so that you could sort of, first of all, get an idea of what our repository system looks like. Digital Commons has over 500 users. So there are 500 institutions that use Digital Commons. And so they have a basic template. So if you visit any Digital Commons repository, it will all sort of have the same look and feel. But I also wanted to share it because there's a couple of things that I think are really interesting and unique for Digital Commons users. And the first, of course, is the map that you see. So it's a real-time usage map that pops up, and so we have it running on our homepage for our entire repository, and then you'll see in a little bit there are some examples of how you can embed them into individual collections as well. And you also get an idea of the types of collections that we house and manage, including scholarship from departments and schools, journals. We host a number of peer-reviewed academic journals, as well as university archives and our thesis and dissertation collections. So the nice thing about Digital Commons is that it has several different sort of what I like to call modules that support and display a variety of material types. From this list, you get a sense of all the different types of format types that are accommodated. And over the next few slides, I have some examples just to show you sort of what that looks like. We also are able to embed videos into Digital Commons, but they also just recently introduced some native streaming as well. So you can also have native streaming directly within their system. So these two screenshots are from our electronic thesis and dissertation collection, and they really demonstrate how our textual materials are typically presented. The screenshot on the left shows the collection homepage, which includes that download map that I mentioned. And I'll talk a little bit more about that download map when I talk about analytics. And on the right-hand side, you see that document metadata page. So standard metadata, you have your title, author information, a clear download button, and just a few other things I want to mention about the metadata pages is that each item also includes PlumX metrics, which is a built-in feature in Digital Commons, as well as some social media share buttons to support sharing as well. This is an example from our student newspaper. We have quite a few newspapers within our collection. And the module that we use for our newspapers is called a book gallery. And so it automatically pulls the cover page from your document to show a PDF preview. And the book gallery also allows for multiple file downloads. So if a book has chapters or something like that, you can have multiple download buttons as well. And again, you'll see that that PlumX metrics button is built in there, as well as the share buttons, but the metadata and the presentation of that material is a little bit different and just supports a different material type. So these two I have together, and these are both within our repository, but the first thing you'll notice is that they look very different than sort of the overall design of our repository. And that's because journals and conferences and events are eligible for custom design within Digital Commons. And that's a service that is part of our annual hosting fee. So we're not charged extra for design or anything like that, which is really great, especially if you come across a group such as this International Conference on Thinking. This was not an FIU event. This was an event that was being hosted at FIU. So we could really do some strong branding when we put this together. And they used the platform, they used Digital Commons to accept submissions from potential speakers and potential authors. And they went through the peer review process. So both the journals and the events use a module that's called Etiquette, and that's their peer review and publishing module. And that, again, allows the authors to submit directly to the system and then go through either a blind or double blind review process. All of that stuff is tracked on the back end of the system. And we found that editors and event organizers appreciate all of the sort of automated functionality that's built in there. So there's automated notifications to reviewers, there's automated reminders, and then they can publish directly into the system. So this is really something that we use quite a bit at FIU. And now that everything has moved online and there are all these sort of online conferences, we're seeing more and more use of this etiquette, this event hosting. So I just wanted to, I touched on a lot of these, but I want to go a little bit more in depth to some of the sort of advantages and things that we really like about our digital commons system. And the first is the built-in functionality. So digital commons really is a robust system and has a lot of that built-in functionality to support a variety of formats. And there's also some great options for utilizing third-party plugins to advance sort of the user experience. So things like being able to embed a 3D viewer. We have 3D materials within our repository. So we have a 3D viewer plugin that goes in there so people can really, look at the materials in 3D, as well as integration with story maps or JS timelines. So one of our collections has, we have the full archive of our Department of Theater productions. And so folks can go through scroll through the timeline. It's built into the collection. And so it's really, really, really neat. So there's lots of built-in functionality. The other advantage is really the support. So I can't say enough about the support at bpress. We have one support person, so you're always talking to the same support person. You're not bounced around to whoever happens to get the ticket. And while the support person has changed over the years, they have all been really informed and incredibly helpful. And they're not just there to help when things are not working. They're also great to bounce ideas off of and to sort of say, hey, we have this idea. Is anybody else using this type of structure for this type of collection or whatever it is? And so they provide a lot of high level support, I would say. In addition, the reports and analytics from Digital Commons are great, and I have a few slides in a minute that I'll show you what sort of that analytics looks like. But in addition to those PlumX metrics and the world map that you saw, each author or collection administrator receives monthly download reports and access to a dashboard that they can quickly just look at the user statistics. So all of our graduate students, they submit their thesis and dissertations into Digital Commons, and they receive an automated report every month that tells them how many people have accessed their particular document or whatever it is. So that's really neat, and we see that particular departments, when we our departments like to see those monthly usage reports, and so numbers, they love that. And of course, Digital Commons is really easy to use. So while we in the library do a majority of the upload of the materials, we do have collections like the journals or the events that we hand over to our faculty to manage. And our students, again, they submit their ETDs to Digital Commons, and all of these groups find the collection management and submission to be really easy. There's a web form and all that, and I'll show you that in a moment as well. And then batch functionality is something that is really a fantastic advantage of Digital Commons. So we are able to batch upload and batch revise collections. And it's really very easy. You go into the collection, you download an Excel spreadsheet specific to that collection, you make your changes, you upload it back into the system, and it makes the changes. It's pretty straightforward. And it was incredibly helpful when we were working to put our IR collections, our Digital Commons collections, into SSDN, because we had to add write statements across all of our materials. And so it was just download a spreadsheet, add it in, upload, and we were done. So those are some of the main sort of advantages of Digital Commons. So I wanted to just give you a peek at what it looks like on the back end. This is an example of the submission form, and you can see it's pretty straightforward web-based submission form. These submission forms are also fully customizable for each collection. So you can include a variety of metadata fields necessary for whatever the collection is. You can turn on and off the required fields, and you can also have administrative fields and public fields. So if there's information that's not necessary for the public side of things, you can still have it as part of the metadata just on the back end. Or you can just have it as metadata that administrators can change. So again, for our thesis and dissertation collections, our students submit their work into the repository. There are a number of fields that they don't have access to, and then we have access to once it's been submitted, so we can complete sort of the metadata for those. And in addition to uploading the file along with this metadata record, you can have a number of supplemental files included in this. So if there's any supporting material that goes with the main document, you can include those as well. And this is our the author dashboard, those metrics. So we have this world map that shows you the usage of the collections. And people love this map. It's colorful, it shows global reach, and it has big numbers. So our administrators like to use this. Our authors love to see this. They love to see where their work is being accessed from. And so we are really grateful that we're able to have this world map. And this is just this bar graph is another part of that author dashboard. So it's not just the map. You can access the downloads, the metadata page hits, all of that, and it will generate these, visualize these things sort of on the fly. There's a number of filters that you can include. You see sort of in the top right-hand corner, there's some filters, and you can adjust the dates. You can adjust by collection, and it's all really quick. And then when you're ready to pull it out of the system, you click Generate Report, and you get a spreadsheet of your usage. And then finally, you can have a quick overview of how individual items are being accessed and sort of what your top 10 accessed items are within a collection, within the whole repository, or whatever it is. So you can even have item level metrics, which is also very helpful. So I know I said a lot of really nice things, but of course there are some disadvantages to the system because not every system is perfect. And one of those is that you can't custom build features. So the design is the design, right? It's a template. If there are features that you're looking for your repository, you can submit your request to Digital Commons, and they'll sort of take note of it. And if they get enough similar requests, they will put it into their development queue, and then you can sort of hope that it gets developed. And while they are very responsive and they do continue to develop and provide, sort of meet those needs of what the user community is looking for. If there's something that you need specifically for a specific project and it's not built into the system, you're sort of out of luck, and you can't really do that on your own. And of course, the other disadvantage is the cost. It is hosted, so there is an annual hosting fee that we pay. And while we don't have to have development staff, and we don't have to pay development staff to host this collection and to manage the collection for us, I know that cost can be, and that ongoing cost can really be a barrier for a lot of institutions. I will also mention in terms of the cost that Digital Commons has a sort of an unlimited storage, cloud storage. So they will, of course, it has to be reasonable. I would say at some point they'll probably tell you you can't do it, but typically they won't put any caps on how much you're depositing into the system. So that's, I guess, another benefit as well. And let's see, I have a whole bunch. How am I doing on time?
You're good.
Okay, good. So I'll talk about our experience with harvesting our collections into SSDN, and I'll go through these pretty quickly. So DPLA for a long time sort of didn't want the scholarly or didn't specifically outline that scholarly content was to be harvested into DPLA, but they recently changed that, and you'll see here this is sort of what they talk about in terms of hosting those materials. And the most important part of this collection selection criteria for DPLA was this little bit. It says when repositories can separate out the content into these sets, then we'll accept it. And so Digital Commons does a really nice job of that. So we were able to identify a number of sets when we first did our harvesting via SSDN. So we had over 5,300 records, and those are all of the collections that we harvested in our initial harvest. And I will say that it was a really very easy process. Of course, we had to do some initial metadata cleanup and enhancement, like including the right statements. And I mentioned that. And of course, with the batch revision functionality, we were able to do that really quickly. We provided that list of sets to SSDN, and they did an initial pull of information. So again, with Digital Commons, we have OAI PMH. So we were able to pull it via OAI PMH. We were able to pull the metadata for the sets. We did run into one, I don't know, hiccup or whatever you want to call it. So Digital Commons uses qualified Dublin Core, but it's like own flavor of Dublin Core, qualified Dublin Core. And so we had two options. We'd either have bpress change their fields, which is not going to happen because they keep it consistent across all of the institutions. There's not that level of customization available, or SSDN would map that Digital Commons qualified Dublin Core, which is exactly what they did. And so we were able to find a way to pull all of that stuff into SSDN. So, and it was really, I would say, pretty painless, though I was not the one doing the mapping. So, you know, but as a user, it was a good experience. So today we have over 8,000 items that are harvested, and here you can see just another map that shows the reach of our collections in DPLA. So we're really pleased, and we'll continue adding our collections through SSDN. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jill. Up next, we have Katrina Harkness, and she will be discussing Omeka.
Hi, I'm Katrina Harkness, Education Officer with the Florida Memory Program at the State Archives of Florida. And I was also part of the team that implemented Omeka in 2011. And that was supposed to be my contact information, but it's not there, so I'll put that in chat later. I hope I can answer any questions that you have, but of course, as a lot of you are librarians, you know the motto, if I don't have the answer, I'll find somebody who does, so please email me if there's anything I didn't cover. To tell you a little bit about Florida Memory, the digitized records on Florida Memory come from the collections of the State Archives of Florida and the special collections of the State Library of Florida. The State Archives of Florida began their first digitization project with the Florida Photographic Collection in 1966. As we added collections, each had its own database. The photographic collection was operated on a modified version of our library catalog, and the other collections were built in custom databases of various configurations. In 2011, Florida Memory was composed of a system of databases that were just cobbled together. Each collection had its own interface. We wanted to unify the database, but keep the distinct character of Florida Memory. So we were seeking a platform. We first looked at Islandora, and Islandora is really powerful. We were really interested in that, and at first it seemed like the obvious solution. But the problem was that we didn't have the dedicated IT staff to support the customization that we wanted to do. It was just beyond our means in terms of how much IT support it required. So after doing the research and comparing the options that were available, we decided to go with Omeka. And Omeka is a free open source content management system for digital collections. And I'm trying to slide advance. There we go. And so there are some considerations with open source software. So it is free. We have no cost to download, no licensing fees, no restrictions on making modifications. But getting a free open source software is kind of like getting a free car. It's great, but of course there are still costs in keeping it running, server costs, staff time. So even though it's free, it's a huge investment. So we wanted to make sure when we got into a system that it was going to be something that could be sustained for a long time. So sustainability in a way that works now and in the future. So when we're looking at Omeka, it's supported by a vibrant community. It's out of George Mason University with funding from multiple organizations, including the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS, the Library of Congress, the Getty Foundation, and the National Endowment of the Humanities. So we had a pretty good feeling that Omeka would continue to support the features that we wanted and to continue to improve and add new features in the future. So, but we also wanted to have an exit strategy. How can we get our data out? If for any reason the software stopped being supported, which can happen, there are a lot of softwares that have kind of gotten popular and then gone by the wayside. Or if the software is still great and we're still great, but we're just going into different directions and we want to get our data out and move into another system. So in Omeka, our data is easy to export. It's there, it's accessible. We can get into it anytime we want. Drilling down some caveats here. This is this system for us is for online user access. It's not an archival management or collections management software. We use Rediscovery for collections management, and that's the software that lets us know the information about the archival collections, where the digital items originate, who the donor is, where the collection is on our shelves, all the data that go with arrangement description, and staff and patron access to tangible physical items. So we're not using this for archival collection management, and we're also not using this for digital preservation. Our master copies of digital items are stored outside the system of Omeka. With that, some pros. It's designed for cultural heritage materials. So archival materials are generally collection-oriented, different from many library collections. And historically in Florida Memory, we'd had a landing page and a customized display for each of our distinct collections. So the way maps were laid out and searched is different from photographs, and we wanted to keep that flexibility and that flavor. So it allows us to add plugins. The metadata is cataloged in Dublin Core. It does support controlled vocabularies and other content management features. The cons. So Florida, Omeka was designed really for small to mid institutions, and we were much bigger with 300,000 items, some of those multiple pages, much bigger than what Omeka was designed to do. So we kind of broke Omeka a little bit when we first started using it, and then we figured out how to customize it and make it work for us. The native search function was not robust enough for our collections. We ended up with a Solar Search plugin. We recently, because of all the customizations that we had done with Omeka, we weren't able to keep up as the Omeka software updated without breaking our customizations. So we recently updated all at once, and we're still tweaking to get everything to work, although I'm really excited it's going to be there. One of the things we did was we broke the search again. Although they've updated many features and included as standard many of the things that we had added as customizations, the search is not robust enough for the sheer number of items that we have. So we're looking at another plugin and looking at Elasticsearch for that, and hope to have that implemented soon. So we use what is now called Omeka Classic. When we started, there was only one Omeka. There's also a hosted version of Omeka called Omeka.net and a multi-tenant version called Omeka S. Interestingly, Omeka S also comes with DPLA ready resource templates. So if you want to share your items with DPLA, it's really easy to do that. I'm going to next here. I'm still not sure how I'm actually getting this page. I think there's a little delay. There we go. Okay. Those are our items and one more. So I wanted to also give a shout out to SSDN and say that for us, the best part of joining SSDN is working together with institutions across the state to share Florida's cultural history. It's really exciting to be a part of this journey, and I'm looking forward to working with any of you that are just newly dipping a toe into those waters. The State Archives of Florida is here to answer questions, not just about Omeka, but especially when we have some smaller institutions, for anybody that has questions about the archival side of collections management, all the work that you need to do before you do your digitization, arranging, description, preservation. If you have any questions about that, feel free to contact State Archives or SSDN. We're happy to help with that. Thank you, everybody. That is my Omeka in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Katrina. And thank you to all of our presenters today for talking about their digital library platforms. We have plenty of time for question and answer right now. So feel free to go into the chat box, ask your questions. I believe that Kayla Zayas-Rees was also going to maybe get on the microphone and ask some questions today.
Yeah, so hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Sunshine State Digital Network Coordinator, and I have the pleasure of working with all of these wonderful people to get their collections shared to the Digital Public Library of America. So my first question is for Kaleena. I wanted to know more about the type of support that you receive having your Islandora instance hosted through FALSC. Obviously, you all don't have to employ development staff or anything like that at your institution. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the kind of support that you receive from FALSC and the advantages and disadvantages of having that hosted through FALSC. So if you could talk about things like the kind of support you receive for your design, for your metadata, any kind of customizations, things like that in terms of the support that you receive.
Yeah, I can go in there. Okay, good. Sorry, I was having Wi-Fi issues earlier, so apologies. So yeah, the support that we receive from FALSC, it's rather general. There's, as I mentioned earlier briefly, there's not a lot of development capabilities coming out of there, unfortunately. We all understand because things like that, obviously development is quite pricey for just about any institution, really. So they give kind of general support. So when things that can be done on a very broad span, so for example, the implementation of rights statements. So for those who don't know, rightstatements.org, it's a site for standardized rights statements to provide users with clarity for copyright status for assets, and especially for using digital assets. And so they've been helpful in the past for doing things like helping to alter the mods forms to be able to insert the appropriate rights statements .org URL to the assets, and as well as have helped for collections in going ahead and being able to essentially on their end kind of batch load the rights statements once I've provided them with the appropriate statements with the assets in the past. So that saved a lot of work for sure, and not having to manually insert all of those. It is definitely quite a large project to go ahead and kind of retroactively reevaluate copyright status. So they are definitely helpful in that regard. And they do also provide other services, such as when there is, they do have an Excel to mods transformer, which is helpful for those that do not have the capability to create XML. So that transformer processes Excel sheets of metadata and transforms it into XML that then assets can then be batch loaded. And yeah, and then just kind of general troubleshooting. So, and they've definitely tried to adapt as needs have continued on. There's been a lot of evolution as far as, for I would say many people in the consortium, their needs as collections have been developed. And so they've done some adaptations, like for there's assets that are books. So there is a module for the book content module, which is where it presents book assets as they are. So there's actually digital pages that turn when the users press a button, and that's really great. But one of the things that it can be very, very arduous to go ahead and ingest those items, because as we know, books can vary from having simply 5 pages to going on towards 100 or more. So they went ahead and made an adaptation to where that kind of editing, they made an offline editing rather than doing it initially through the GUI, which was how it was done for quite some time. They established an offline batch editing system, so that way you can go ahead and you can ingest these rather large assets, which before they would take a large amount of time, especially if you had multiple people trying to do it at various institutions via the GUI. The offline batch ingest for the book content is so much easier, because then it goes into a queue essentially, and it ingests definitely about half the time and definitely with far more accuracy than the GUI, which would kind of be a little bit overloaded. So those kind of fixes and adaptations, it's definitely been of great use. Now we just need to have the state give digital libraries a couple $1 million, and we can have a couple developers, and I think we could be really gangbusters.
Awesome, thanks, Kaleena. Hallelujah, please give us all the money, state. Elliot has a question for Jill in the chat box. What 3D viewer do you use in Digital Commons?
So the 3D viewer that is compatible with Digital Commons is Sketchfab. We don't have it turned on at the moment. We got our first 3D item, and so we do have the item, the STL files in Digital Commons, but we're not using the viewer right now because they have to stitch all of the STL files together in order to put this. It's a map of the Miami Lighthouse for the blind. And so it's not viewing, but we have tested it and it does work. So it's Sketchfab.
Thanks, Jill. I have a question for you as well. So I know that FIU uses SOBEC-CM, which is an open source program developed out of the University of Florida for their cultural heritage collections, their special collections. And you're currently using Digital Commons for your institutional repository materials. I know that UF uses SOBEC-CM for both of those types of content, and I was wondering why the decision was made to host those things separately at FIU. What were you weighing when you made that decision?
So we have Digital Commons and we've had it since 2009, and we primarily had it for our thesis and dissertations. And that's sort of where we started in 2009. We didn't have the SOBEC system running, which is called dpanther. That didn't, and I am not as familiar with the development of dpanther, but I know it was after we had Digital Commons. And so we stuck with Digital Commons because our theses and dissertations were in there, and our collections have just grown since then. So there are, as I mentioned, a lot of benefits with Digital Commons, and so that are not available in dpanther, so we haven't moved in that direction. So we see them as complementing each other, but having different functions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's helpful. And going off of that, I have another question for Kaleena. So I noticed that you host your institutional repository materials and your special collections materials in the same repository. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the pros and cons of having both types of content in one repository.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a fantastic question because it's one of those decisions that when you go into making it, like, okay, we're gonna have our institutional repository and our digital library in the same spot, one-stop shopping. It seems like a great idea that could not possibly have any cons whatsoever. And then the real world happens and you realize that it actually gets a little more complicated than that. So I would say the number one thing kind of drawback is that it gets very confusing for your average, I'll use the term layperson for simplicity's sake. So folks who don't work within this kind of niche field of ours. So when you use the terms such as digital library versus institutional repository, what happens is that the majority of people don't have the vocabulary to understand what that difference is. So you really have to drive home and be very, very explicit on what you're referring to, depending on whomever your audience is. So for example, when I deal with faculty members and when I'm trying to discuss with them, like, here's where your research ends up at. This is a great source to go ahead and promote your scholarship and to have that readily accessible for other people. You really have to point them very, very directly to the institutional repository, because it doesn't take much for someone to end up at the digital library and go, these are very nice things. I don't know what they have to do with me. Which is kind of a general issue with having a repository period, is kind of having to making the case for what this has to do with me. I find that's very common with both faculty, students, and the general public. So yeah, I would say differentiating between either one, because it's just not very well-known vocabularies. Even terms like digital repository, I think that's a new term for a lot of people still, and it requires having to take time out to really, really kind of slowly state exactly what these things are and how it applies to them, for sure.
Thank you so much. And again, as a reminder to all of our attendees, you can type your questions in the chat box if you have any for any of our presenters. I have a question for Elliot and Laura about CONTENTdm. So Elliot, you mentioned that you're able to upload URLs into CONTENTdm, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about why you would want to do that and what that looks like in CONTENTdm.
Sure. So that's, it's actually not a feature that we've used too extensively in CONTENTdm, but I think one of the ways it can be really useful is that it lets you sort of treat a URL, sort of an online object, in the same way you would treat any other sort of digital asset. So you can apply metadata in the same way. You can sort of have links to items alongside other materials that you've uploaded. Like I said, we haven't used it too extensively, but I think if you had sort of maybe a more kind of multimedia or like digital archiving type collection, it could be useful in that way, so that you could provide access through the same interface you provide access to other materials as well. We also use that feature in the new CONTENTdm that we're moving to. That's what we use for, as Laura mentioned, we host our audio and video materials in another system in Kaltura. So we use the URL feature in CONTENTdm to sort of load the player for those Kaltura materials, so that you can view them within the CONTENTdm system, even though they're hosted in another system, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Are you able to view the websites? Is there like a viewer, or it just takes you to the website?
I believe if it's just sort of a normal, like just a normal URL for a normal web page, it would just take you out to the web page. But I think that's how it works. Now I want to go play with this some more, because I'm realizing how little I know about it.
Thank you so much. I just want to add a couple things. So I think one of the benefits of open source systems, which a lot of these that we talked about today are open source systems, is their customization ability and just your ability to really make them work for you if you have the staff on hand. I think one of the really big benefits for Islandora in particular is not only that it's an open source product, but it's a community-based open source product. So there is a community around Islandora that commits features and new changes and things like that that really work for the needs of the users. So the people that are using Islandora a lot of the time are also submitting new developments to this community that can be adopted by other institutions. So I think that's one of the really big benefits of Islandora, is that it's a product that is made by its users. And so when new features are needed, you can talk to the community about what your needs are, what you wish were different about the product, and you can talk in constructive ways about how to improve the product for yourself and other users. So I think that's probably why FALSC chose this really malleable product. Also probably why the state library chose Omeka, as Katrina was talking about earlier. It makes it malleable so that you can make it work for you and you don't have to work too hard for it. And so on that note, both of those products have versions where you can multi-site, which allows you to host different versions with different kinds of customizations and designs on those different platforms. Omeka also offers a hosted version, which lets you, which gives you the benefit of support from Omeka, so that you don't necessarily have to have development staff or servers. I know the state library hosts their own Omeka, and it is highly customized. So Katrina, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the customizations, highlights that you've made to Omeka and why you've made those customizations?
Wow, well, we've been customizing for about a decade. So we've made so many customizations for so many reasons, but the bottom line is always accessibility for the user. We wanted the page to not feel like you're coming to a catalog, but like you're coming to a place to explore. And since our collections can be so different, we wanted different ways to explore them. For instance, we do have audio and video in our collection, so we want the audio to play on the page. One of the recent customizations has been, we have a number of folk life recordings, which are generally 45 minutes to an hour. And initially they were just one recording. So if you came to that page, you got that, you know, you could click and play or you could download, and that was great. But they've updated it so that it's more of a playlist form, so that each individual song or interview, each segment within that 1 hour has its own track listing, and it has tracks just like you'd have on your CD. So if you don't want to listen to or skim through 30 minutes, you can just click on exactly the song that you want to go to. So, so that's been a huge improvement. Things like the maps, sometimes you want to search those by place. Say, you know, you want a certain year, but sometimes you just want to look at a cool map. So one of the options on the map page is to see the thumbnails for all the maps on that page, and you can just scroll down and click on things and choose to search them visually. So those are the kind of customizations that we've made to explore a real deep dive into the collections, and also understanding them as collections, as related pieces with their history, as opposed to just individual items. Does that work? Does that make?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I think making customizations to support ease of use for users is really important. And you know, I think a lot of the time, we on the side of putting the content out there aren't necessarily always using the user interfaces, so it can be difficult to identify some of those problems. So I think it's important to think about our users when we're selecting these programs, as well as the ease of use for ourselves. So I think that's a good point to think about. So yeah, does anyone in the audience have any questions for our presenters? I have a couple more if no one has questions, but I don't want to take up all the time. Okay. Well, let me see. So, Kaleena, I know that you're using a consortial product, and I was wondering why your institution decided to use Florida Islandora. I know it was a group decision, and I was just wondering if you could give some insight into why this was selected for your institution and how it meets, how you felt it met your needs.
Yeah, I will say, just for clarity's sake, I was not involved in the initial decision making. That was that was a little bit before I came on. However, I will say that to best miles, Islandora was kind of picked as, for one thing, having an open source platform, I think, was a really big. It was a really big part of the decision making. Part of it because of the idea of having as many people as possible be able to adapt and utilize this source, whereas other platforms that may require a considerable amount of money to pay a company for, et cetera, would be out of reach for some institutions. And especially gets difficult when you're dealing with a wide variety of institutions, obviously with various, with varying budgeting options available to them. However, and it was I think it was that, and as well as kind of it it is, as was mentioned earlier, I believe by Katrina, that it's a rather powerful system, in that there can be a lot, for all my talk earlier about the limitations that I wish we can kind of overcome, again, with the grand wish that we can kind of do batch editing, right? But the things that it can do on a regular basis with the sizes of the assets it can bring in. I mean, it can handle up to, it's got a 2 gig minimum maximum, which is not bad for the majority of assets, such as video, for example. That can handle cleverly edited, like hour and some change, hour and a half video. So that's not bad. Some platforms cannot handle things like that. So it's robust enough for our needs, while at the same time, it can also accommodate a variety of institutions as well. And I think that's kind of its real strengths. Yeah. Oh, I'm back. Oh, okay. You can hear me. And yeah, I think that's about it on my end. Yeah, it's just a really kind of robust program that's accessible, and it's with a small bit of training, it's actually fairly user friendly. That's, I definitely say what it has going for it.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just add that this is just a small sampling of digital collections systems that are available out there. And there are a lot of options when it comes to selecting something for making your collections accessible to the public. So we do hope to have at some point part 2 of this to talk about some of the other systems that are being utilized in Florida institutions, so you can get a sense of how those work for people and what the pros and cons are for those, and how people are using them. So we hope that you'll join us when that comes around. And I'll give it back to Hannah. Thank you, guys.
Well, again, I just wanted to say thank you to all of our presenters today. This has been a really informative afternoon, and I hope that the rest of our audience felt the same. Like Kayla was saying, we will have other events posted, so be sure to check out the SSDN website. There are also other social media sites where you can find information about upcoming events. We're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I hope everyone has a terrific holiday week, and thank you for joining us today.